In Season 4, Episode 3 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead, you have the opportunity to interrogate Abel, one of the members of the Delta, in order to get the location of the place where his group took your friends. He obviously doesn't want to divulge the information, and you have a few different approaches that you can take to get it out of him. On the one hand, you could try to just talk to him and try to convince him to help you. This would normally be the preferred way of doing things from a humanist standpoint, as it means getting what we need with the least amount of suffering. There is also the option to negotiate with him, especially as it turns out his injuries from the battle that preceded his capture are going to be fatal, and he desperately doesn't want to become a zombie. Promising to keep him from turning turns out to be the thing that gets the info we need, but there's another method that we can use that isn't quite so nice. We can choose to hurt him in several ways, in the hope that the pain will bring the information out of him. And that option isn't even presented as a last resort. It's something that is offered as an early choice, with the option to slap him being at the top of the list. You can choose to withhold water from him, slam his head on the table, sick the dog on him, all in an attempt to make him talk. And all of that raises an interesting question. What level of harm is too much when it comes to attempting to save others? Is there a line that you shouldn't cross no matter the stakes? We can start by looking at a list of studies that have mostly concluded that torture, doing harm to someone in order to make them give you information or execute a specific act, doesn't work like most people think it does. While most people probably think of movies where the bad guy finally breaks under pressure, the truth is that people are more likely to give bad information when faced with pain. A study on the efficacy of torture actually subjected participants to pain, in the form of having their hands submerged in freezing water of various temperatures, while being interrogated by an opponent who was trying to get them to divulge information. The study found that participants were more likely to give false information, especially as the water got colder, than to actually reveal the truth. And that makes sense, as the majority of people would likely be willing to say anything just to get the pain to stop. Even if they didn't have the correct information, knowing that revealing anything at all would end their suffering would be an incentive to say what they think the interrogator wanted to hear. And that forces us to ask how we would know that the information was reliable when someone finally opened up. How do we know that they are telling the truth and not just saying what they think the interrogator wants to hear? How do we know that they even have the information being sought? Now, you might say with Abel that he would definitely know where his group was stationed, where they would have taken the kids. But if he is biding his time on the chance that Lily and the rest are coming back for him, why would he tell Clementine the truth? He could just lie to make the pain stop, hoping that by the time we discovered the truth, it would be too late. So if causing pain isn't really a reliable way to get information out of someone because they'd be more likely to lie, what is a better way to handle situations where you need to find out something that is time sensitive? Let's look at a scene from Detroit Become Human as an example of an interrogation technique that works out a little bit better. Connor is tasked with finding out why an android went rogue and killed its owner. The first thing he has to do is establish a rapport, show that he isn't hostile, and that he only wants to help. By understanding what the android suspect has been through, Connor is able to connect with it and get it to open up about how its owner abused it. He's also able to get the first real inkling of information on RA9, giving the investigation about the rogue androids a direction to follow. So if talking and connecting with a prisoner works better than hurting them, why would anyone want to do harm in the first place? While in some circumstances, you wind up dealing with someone who is willing to talk, but only if they see some benefit to themselves in the situation. Maybe they fear for their lives from the person they work for, and aren't willing to talk because the threat from their boss is higher than anything you are willing to do. We see something along these lines in The Wolf Among Us, where Bigby needs information from Tweedledee. Outright violence won't work on D because he's more afraid of what his boss might do than anything Bigby would do. But he also needs to know that Bigby is willing to do what is needed to get the information he wants. In that case, showing that you're willing to cross lines while also working to build a rapport actually works better than doing one or the other. And that brings us to a simple truth that lies in the center of this whole discussion. The best approach is contingent on the person and situation we're dealing with. For one thing, the person being interrogated has to actually have the information that we need. For another, we have to be able to figure out the right buttons to push to get them to divulge that information. Maybe there's someone who thinks that they are above the law, like Tweedledee. Or maybe there's someone who thinks that they're on some righteous crusade like Abel, out to do what he thinks is best to defend his home and unwilling to admit that he could possibly be doing anything wrong. Or maybe they're a victim themselves, stuck in a bad situation like the android in Detroit, just needing someone to understand their plight and connect with them. So that helps us start working on the how when it comes to getting information, but the more important thing, the initial question we had, is if any of those hows are morally okay. The first thing we need to establish is the moral framework we are using to figure out what is allowed and what isn't permissible. As a general rule, I lean into humanism, with the goal of maximizing human well-being and minimizing suffering overall. I also try to approach things from a consequentialist standpoint, focusing on the outcome of actions to determine whether they should be considered moral or immoral, and to what degree. For our purposes here, we'll also consider androids equal to humans from a rights perspective, as I've argued in another video for this stance. With that in mind, it's easy to justify Connor's treatment of the android in the interrogation room, as the information was easy to obtain without doing any harm to the android. Connor established a rapport and was able to find out what he needed through dialogue alone. The situations with D and Abel are both a bit more complex, however. D may or may not be a part of something more than he lets on, but there isn't really anything other than his suspicious activity to go on. While we know that 2 women have been murdered, there is nothing to suggest that more will be coming, or that D was in any way involved in those murders. As such, we really can't morally justify hurting him, no matter how much we might want to. Abel, on the other hand, actively has information that could help us recover 3 people who have been taken prisoner by a group that we think might harm them. And I say think because to that point in the story, we don't know much about their intentions with any kind of certainty. We know they've taken kids in the past, and we know that they are not above hurting those kids as we see how they treat Clementine and AJ when they first come across them, but everything else is just conjecture. And before the comment section starts lighting up with comments about how we know what the Delta is like or Lily is a bad person, we are looking at this through the lens of Clementine before the scenes on the boat or any conversation with anyone outside of the brief talk with Lily and the word of James. Clementine is going into the interrogation of Abel with none of the knowledge that we have in hindsight, and we need to approach this as realistically as possible from that angle. If she knew the outcome, there would be no moral quandary, as we could just pick the choice with the best possible ending and go with it. As it stands, she needs to get information out of Abel, and the question is, what amount of pain can she cause that would be morally permissible to get that information? The unknown here is the risk of actual harm to the kids that the Delta group kidnapped. For all we know, they could simply be shoved in a cell with plenty of food and comfort before being taken to wherever the Delta is located. Of course, they could also be in serious danger. And that's really where the desire to hurt Abel comes from. Not knowing what the people Clem cares about are going through, and a lack of control over the situation. Causing pain is a response to that lack of control especially. When we as humans feel like we don't have any say in the directions of a situation, we lash out. The worse the situation is, the bigger the explosion is, and the more anger we have to direct at anyone or anything we see as responsible for our situation. Abel was part of the group that took our friends, and he is the only one left behind in the aftermath, so he gets the brunt of the anger. When he doesn't cooperate, we want to make him do what we say at all costs. Time seems to be of the essence as well, with the threat of Lily and her group disappearing with our friends, or even coming back with a bigger force, looming. So not only do we need to make him talk, but we need to do it fast. Let's put everything together and determine the best possible route to take. For the moment, we're going to ignore the options presented to us in the game because this hypothetical is meant to go beyond the game and act as a learning opportunity. We know from the research mentioned earlier that inflicting pain on him probably isn't going to be effective. It's likely that he will provide us with bad information just to make the pain stop, and in the end, it'll wind up costing us valuable time to do something that isn't going to help. We know that he is in pain already from the injury sustained in the fight, and he is thirsty and likely exhausted. Giving him water is a good first step, and opening up the discussion to build some kind of rapport would be important. We don't have a ton of time to do this, but we can connect with him as a fellow survivor who just wants what's best for our community, and that might get us moving in the right direction. Now, in the game, his breaking point is realizing that he is going to die, and not wanting to turn. We can offer to spare him that awful fate if he helps us out. But what if that doesn't happen? Let's say his wounds aren't enough to kill him, and he doesn't decide just to give the information so easily. One thing that we could do would be to offer to swap him for our friends, with the promise of going home being something he would likely be keen on. We could also push a little harder on building rapport, but to be honest, I think he would be willing to talk at this point because I don't think he's quite as tough as he likes to pretend. Evidence of this can be found in the way that he's willing to leave Clem and AJ in the train station if you let him walk out, and how he seems to regret his actions in the battle when the reality of his death hits him. He isn't some mindless raider looking to just rape and pillage his way across the land. He is a human being that got too wrapped up in the moment and made some really bad choices. And that is the key to all of this and to answering our question. Torture is about dehumanizing the prisoner, treating them like nothing more than some kind of monster that deserves what we're doing to them. The evidence we have points to it being ineffective, and if it doesn't help to get the information we need, then it's only being done to inflict pain, with that being the true end goal. In order to attempt to justify inflicting any level of pain to try and get information, we would need to be able to say with 100% certainty that the pain would produce results and that lives would be saved or that the greater amount of suffering would be avoided. Even then, harming another human being against their will with no benefit to them is unethical. A doctor inflicting pain to save a patient's life would be an example of a situation where something like that would be okay. But harming someone to potentially save someone else's life is another story. A counter-argument to this would be to say that Abel had done some horrible things and that he somehow deserves any pain inflicted. But the hard truth is, it doesn't matter what Abel has done, or how much you hate him for his actions. He is a human being, deserving of certain rights that all human beings are entitled to. It might not be preferable, and it might be difficult to accept. But if he won't talk, then we have to be willing to accept that we might have to find another way to locate our friends. But now I want to hear from you. How did you handle Abel? Did you try to convince him with pain, or were you more merciful? Would you handle the situation any differently after watching this video? Let me know in the comments below. Sources I referenced will be linked in the description, so check out the studies and other material for yourself. While some of these things might seem obvious to some people, they aren't always so plain for everyone, and having studies and resources to back up your thoughts and opinions can be really helpful when you meet those who might not be on the same page as you. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the awesome philosophy and ethics and games videos I release here on the channel. If you want to help me out in other ways, I've got a Patreon linked in the description and channel memberships here on YouTube. Both things get you early access to videos, your name on the screen, and some really cool exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.